interactive books. So if everyone's kind of in the room, if you can think of any document that you have in your organization, and feel free to share it or yell it out, that would benefit from interaction or tracking what people are actually looking at in that document. Our goal here was to take that document, whatever it was, add the interaction and tracking to find out what people actually need from that document, what people actually understand from that document, and what people are actually getting from that document. And then make it a little bit more social than just shooting out PDFs to everyone and saying, we'll talk about this at the meeting, or whatever you do now. So Judy, if you want to talk a little bit about PeBL and what it is.
Yep, sure. So PeBL is an activity provider that has been, I'm not, leave it on there. Yeah, leave it on, sorry. Yep. So PeBL basically originated at the ADL as a way to send xAPI statements from eBooks. So it started a couple of years ago. I think it's in the 3rd year of development right now. And there are a lot of important features to how PeBL was originally conceived. So first of all, it incorporates, rather than creating a new standard, it incorporates web standards that are already in place. Can we switch over to Chris's? I haven't. Yeah, sorry, Chris. Can you reshare your screen? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, pop
so it
back
incorporates standards that are already in place. So, for example, it incorporates standard web technology, HTML5, CSS, JavaScript. It uses the EPUB 3 format, and that gives us a lot of benefits in terms of the technology. So, for example, it's very easy to make PeBL content accessible. It's really more accessible by default than the other way around. So it's not necessarily a matter of checking, I need 508 compliance. Most of the text is already there in web-readable format. It's also more responsive by nature. All the text is reflowable and everything. So you're doing things in a much different kind of way than creating slides. A lot of e-learning tools kind of have the slide metaphor. PeBL is much more like an ebook, shockingly, and it's cross-platform as well due to using standard web technology. So originally the concept was that we're going to use EPUB 3, which it does use. At that time, it seemed like e-readers like Kindle and whatever would stay on the cutting edge of the EPUB standards that were being written. Well, it turns out that they have not, and have elected to kind of not adopt, at least yet, EPUB 3. So PeBL actually has a built-in progressive web app that functions as the e-reader, so you can really use it on any device, regardless of whether you have any special e-reader software installed, or whether you're looking on a special e-reader device. It's actually built within, readable within the browser on pretty much any device. Honestly, I like to say that PeBL doesn't have a whole lot of really unique features, but it has a unique feature set that provides the best combination I've seen of features that we know actually work for learning science. And it also builds in standard ebook tools like highlighting and things like that. xAPI is integrated from the ground up. So again, things are, rather than talking about building in xAPI statements for anything that you create, the extensions, the JavaScript part essentially of PeBL creates those xAPI statements automatically. Right now, the status is a code base. It's open source because it was all funded by ADL. So everything that's been done on PeBL, almost everything that's been done on PeBL, definitely what's been funded by the government, is open source. Also because of the fact that it creates, we're talking about web technology, it's very easy to just kind of crack open a PeBL book and make edits to it, make changes in the CSS, and see that those changes implemented across the book. You do have offline access as well, so we talk a lot about like what happens when you're not online and you're doing things, all of those statements are generated, they're saved in a kind of an onboard LRS that PeBL has, and then when your connection is reestablished, then it'll send to the ultimate LRS endpoint that the book is connected to. And you have the idea of graceful degradation as well. So I talked about how not all e-readers have picked up the EPUB 3 standard. Because PeBL gracefully degrades, it won't entirely break, but of course you won't get the same experience if you're reading a PeBL book on, say, a Kindle. And it has extensions built into it, which, again, I said is the JavaScript part. That's the main difference between EPUB 2 and 3. So just a little bit about the PeBL technology and what kinds of learning experiences it was built to facilitate. And back to you, Kristen.
Yes, and I actually want to go back to the chat real fast because I want to see if anyone thought of ways that they would use this. Because when I initially heard about it, immediately went to my employee handbook. That was a really big one that rather than trying to build an onboarding tool, I could just have the employee handbook. We have a really good employee handbook at my company, not to brag. I'm turning my notifications off, by the way. We have a really good employee handbook, but it's long, and we don't know if people are reading it, and we don't know what people are thinking as they go through it. So if we could add some discussion points, if we could add a section where we talk about the different locations that we have, where someone picks their location, and then it filters out all of the information about locations that they're never going to see or never going to work at, and they only see information about their own location, that would be amazing. Just the time saving on their part, the time saving on our part would be great. So that was my initial thought. I know, Judy, you have some other cases where you've seen it be really useful. Employee handbook is also one of them. But does anyone else have any thoughts on it? We can also look at...
I really love... Oh,
go ahead.
Kristen, I was about to say, I really love the idea of an employee handbook or other policy document that is we're able to integrate interactive components because policy documents in particular, so often it's a checkbox, it's a question of compliance. But when we incorporate interactivity, whether it's through multiple choice questions or what Kristen was describing is called content morphing, where you can actually have the content change depending on certain learner factors. So regardless of what kind of interactivity you've built in, you have a lot more potential, I think, for actual learning rather than just having that check a checkbox. By the way, the data modeling session that I'm going to do later, just for the people who are on the ground here, we're going to be looking a little bit more at PeBL's capabilities because I'm going to use it to as a background for that talk. So if you're interested in that, then I'll just put that little call out there. Back to you.
Sorry, I can't mute with my screen share.
I also wonder about help documentation too. Oh yes, or technical rating. Yeah, this is definitely one of the potential uses that we've identified for it because you can build in discussion forums. They're actually really easy to build in, and a lot of kind of collaboration. So it occurs to us, by the way, that Kristen, nobody's actually seen a PeBL book yet, so we probably need to show them a little bit more about the capabilities. We might come back to the question of what people could do with it.
I had to mute to cough. That's why I'm not in there in person. Okay, my screen sharing has gone away completely. I'm not sure why. Do I make it full screen? No. Oh, goodness. Okay, give me just a second. I have angered Adobe Connect again. You can hear me, but I can't see any controls to reshare my screen. So let me see what I can do. Yeah, let me,
presentation also queued up, so if you want me to share the screen and you to tell me when you want to change, that's also fine. Whatever you want to do.
Okay, do that for right now because this is broken for me. So give
All
me a
right.
second.
Absolutely. I'll only go over to presentation mode. Can you do that? Okay, we did the About PeBL. Are we ready to move on to the development part? Kristen, can you hear me? Nope, it looks like we lost her again. So she may need to sign back in so it'll be fine. Welcome back, Kristen.
That is much easier than just trying to work with the window that's all black. Okay, so Judy, that helps a lot. Thank you. So I don't know if I was cut off for all of that, but the development right now is totally back end, but I know very little about CSS and HTML. I know enough to get by. Like I think as much as most e-learning developers know, which is, I can set up a website, but if something breaks, I have to ask someone smarter. And then I could do it. So I can figure it out. So that's about the level you need right now. But Judy will talk a little bit more about the next steps and how this will be easier. But what we were working with our project was this back-end coding development. And then this, as you can see, has the headings, the text from the book. You can really just pop text in from any storyboard and add the style codes. And then that I class there is an extension. So that's what adds the interactivity. That one is a pop-out. So if you go to the next slide, I think you can see that section in the actual output. So you load that into a reader, and can we go to the next one? Oh, it's okay. So
sorry.
if you click on that pro tip there, so I'll share my screen again when I'm truly ready to share my screen, and I won't destroy everything by doing it. And if you click on that thing that says pro tip, it expands the text, and that's all that code was doing. So after that, you're good.
Sorry.
So that is what the output looks like, but I'll do a share screen to show a bigger and responsive and fun example. But then if you go to the next slide, this is just the life cycle of an ebook. All of those interactions go into an LRS. Obviously, here we're using xAPI, and that happens in the wrapper or in the e-reader that PeBL provides. If you want to do it in iBook or anything like that, I think you have to add in some code, but natively, you do not. That was the part of the project where we felt like we were cheating because we did do a lot of the xAPI work, but once you develop the ebook and put it in the wrapper does all the statement sending for you, so we didn't actually have to code the JavaScript to send the statements. But I think it still counts. So I am going to look for how to share my screen again. I've lost all of my Adobe Connect skills. Oh, can I share my screen again?
You want, Chris,
Oh,
just hold there. Yep. I'm going to switch over to a different pod, and then you should be able to share your
okay.
screen and your webcam again from there.
Okay, so I'm going to share my whole screen again, and then we can look at the life cycle. And I don't know if people in the room or in chat, I can start with just the output, or I think I have everything open that I can show the whole shebang from getting it from the code to the e-reader. But here it is. Oh, oh. Oh, I am going to show that one. Okay, so the reader is there, and all you have to do to get it into the reader is you put your name, you pick your name. This is pretending I have to sign in. That's my actor, so I am now learner. So when Judy shows you the LRS, everything that learner does, that is me. And then you take an EPUB that you have created using your wonderful coding skills, and you just pop it in, and then you go through the output like this. So that code where it had a pop-out window, that is this. And then this reflows the text so that step 3, goes down to the next page or it goes back up. There's also, in this one, we did very simple things because that's what we were limited to with our time and abilities. But we did a little explanation of what an EPUB is. And if you pop that out, it just shows the information and then you can hide it again. So, oh, the other thing, because then we're going to switch to the LRS, so I want to show highlighting. If you want to highlight text, say I'm very interested in the fact that it's an industry standard for digital publications. I'm going to highlight that. I can also click on that and share it. So I'm doing those so we can see it in the LRS. But Judy, if you want to share the LRS statements that we just created with this.
Sure. I'm actually seeing the share screen topic here. And you're probably going to have to click share screen again. And it'll be nice you. Are you in full screen mode?
Me or Judy? Oh, sorry.
Judy, sorry for the just not saying the off screen. There was a I switched to this layout. Do you see anything on your screen? On your computer screen? No, Judy. I think you might have to relaunch Connect.
Well, in that case, I'm going to, while she does that, I'm going to share my screen again, unless that'll destroy everything, but I'm going to share. And I'm going to show kind of the background of how you create the everything in here. So we had that chapter 1. You pull in all of the different extensions that PeBL offers, and then you put that in like that, and then that pop-out extension, you have the content in there. That just has the content that we saw when you clicked that title. And then if you wanted to unzip an EPUB, or we did 2 different explanations on how to unzip an EPUB because Macs handle EPUBs in a very frustrating way, as I also learned during this. So you have to have a separate application to zip up the EPUB, otherwise it just won't work. So we had here, you can click on PC or Mac and then get the instructions that actually made sense to you. In Windows, they're all fleshed out. It's, here's how to actually do it. And then in Mac, we don't have them fleshed out quite yet because it's a frustrating process. Chapter 2, we have that other pop out. So you can add in the, oh, that was me trying to add an image. It didn't work. So you can have SCORM, or an EPUB is like screws, and then that's one explanation, and then like SCORM, and that's another explanation. And that automatically does, like Judy said, a lot of those useful things for cognitive load. So it's letting you, it's kind of prepping you to think about screws and what you know about screws. Then you click on it, you get the information, you already have that context, you hide it so you're not looking at that and it's not distracting you when you're looking at SCORM. It gives you a quick way to do multiple examples, all of those kinds of things. And then to zip it up in a, I'm actually going to just show it here because it's an interesting process. It's good to know if you ever want to do this. You zip it up by dragging these to a special app called eCan Crusher, and then that creates an EPUB for you. And then that's the EPUB that you can drag right into the reader if you want to test stuff out and see what's going on. Okay, so that was my extra explanation of the development process. Do we have Judy back?
I think we do. Yes. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for vamping.
My presentation.
We will pass back over. Okay, here we go. All right, I'm sharing. So what you're seeing right now in the LRS is you can see anything that's PeBL demo, that is the EPUB that Kristen was using. I think I'm seeing, by the way, some of the old xAPI code in here because I think that some of the renovations that we did with the xAPI weren't necessarily done until after we had like pulled this code and built this PeBL book with this code. But Kristen's going to talk about sort of the sub-project that we did also revising the xAPI that PeBL outputs. But anyway, here we are in the LRS, and you can see that, so for example, this annotation that Kristen made generated an xAPI statement and everything in there. If anybody is interested in viewing the xAPI that PeBL outputs or in just playing with the books that are available on the reader, you can do that and we can kind of give you the information for that. Yeah, here is it. Did you want me to go to anything
I think just
specific
showing
in the LRS,
the verbs that it's pulling in now, and then we can talk about the other piece of our project. But first, I want to give people a chance to ask questions about PeBL before we run out of time for that. So any questions about what we did with with PeBL books, the PeBL reader, all that stuff for our project? And my screen got black again, but I'm just rolling with it now. So if there are any chats, read them out to me, please.
There are not at the moment. Apparently Adobe Connect is hating on us a little bit right now. I can't see any. I do have a question. I'm not super familiar with PeBL, like the reader. How long has it been? So it's in development by ABL still. At this point, there really isn't even an authoring tool. It's just a code base. Okay, that's the next step in the process. So I'll pitch for that later. But yeah, it's it's definitely still in development. It's at a stage where like most people would not be authoring software, but since it's being funded by ADL and everything like that, we get to involve the community a lot more, which is really cool. Yeah.
So do we want to talk? Oh, good. Okay.
Like Teresa's typing.
I don't know if it's this pod specifically that just doesn't show up on my computer.
I don't know, but, I see there's a chat. It could be. Oh. But a comment about Adobe Connect, not Pebble. So Kristen, I think if you want to move on.
So as the other part of this project, we had a lot of conversations about verbs, very long and very surprisingly interesting conversations about verbs. So Judy, if you still have the slides up, um, I'm going to need eyes.
Oh, okay. Let me share again. Oh,
but
okay.
if you can go to the first verbs one, and we'll see if it shows up for me.
There we go.
Okay, so good, I can see that. So actually, if you go to the xAPI one, that can show a little bit about the old xAPI statements that we're going through. So one of our first tasks was to look at the verbs that PeBL was sending currently, or is sending currently, and recommend better verbs, or more descriptive verbs, if you will. So originally, Judy put together this great. Sorry?
I want to actually hop in and say I got a little bit of the history there. One of the, PeBL was instrumented to send the xAPI from all of these, the e-reader tools, from all of the extensions and everything at the beginning. However, just because of originally it was part of some ADL test or whatever, the verbs had to be instrumented in a particular way. And when we started taking a closer look, we were like, this is not good enough, for what we really wanted to track. And so I kind of got a little bit of backstory about why the verbs were, not, why they were done the way that they were. And so you see a lot of the same verb being used over and over like this.
Yes. So we have the actor works very well. You put in your name when you launch the book. It's beautiful. Actor was fine. The verbs, you can see all of these. Closing a show hide, that's that pop out we were looking at. Both types of those show hides. Everything was preferred. So you would get your statements back, and it was just like they preferred all of this. All of these things the user preferred. So then if you go to the next one, the discussions that we had were closing it was hid, opening was showed. But this was a really good lesson in really trying to future-proof and avoid any confusion when you select verbs for a totally new xAPI profile. So closing a show hide could also be closed. That would work. But closed, when you query that verb, might also be closed the ebook, closed a window. There are a lot of other options for that. Same with opening. Opening could be, we could use launching for that, but we could also just use open the ebook. So showed and hid we came upon as the two most descriptive and least likely to be confused for other things. We also talked a lot about things like, do we care if someone is opening a show hide or a glossary hot word? Do we want different verbs for those two activities? Because right now, if you just query, what did Kristen show? It would say Kristen showed these show hides and she showed these glossary hot words. Do we want to know that she clicked on a glossary hot word or tried to learn more information about what this word means? We decided it's fine. Just all of these things are similar enough actions that we didn't worry about having them queried that way. So I have the whole.
So the kind of thing that they're doing, though, is actually in the payload. It's in the extension. So not only the type, whether it's a show hide or whether it's a glossary hot word or whatever, not only the type, but the ID, because when we storyboard a PeBL book, each extension has an ID, and sometimes each part of the extension has an ID. So for example, I'm not sure if this is one of them, but off the top of my head, a multiple choice question will have an ID. Each of the answer choices will also have an ID. So anything that might be needed to be identified in the xAPI has an ID tied to it. So all of that stuff, it's not necessarily in the verb, but it's
and actually in the next one,
for the
we looked at verbs. And then that automatically moved to looking to the objects. So a lot of the objects were also not using that ID. It was using just the type of extension that was being used. So it was, they responded to a data entry. Cool. Which data entry? There could be like 100 data entries in this ebook. Which one did they respond to? So we decided in this one, again, it wasn't valuable necessarily to differentiate the types of data entry that they were doing. You can have a discussion question, you can have the access level change. So everyone who has access to this ebook can see your answer to the discussion question. Maybe just you can see it. Maybe it's a personal reflection question and you don't want everyone to have access. Maybe it's a team or a class. We decided that we didn't care initially. We didn't want to separate those out because we didn't have to do 4 queries for all of the discussion questions. If we want to see what questions Judy answered, we didn't want to say Judy responded to private discussion, data entry, team data entry, and class data entry. We just wanted data, the different object IDs. Maybe they all start with data entry, so we can query them quickly, and then add an access level in the context to show who has access to that. The context also holds all of the text. So when you are reporting on the discussion questions, the responses, the report has all of the text that they included in that. So you have access, you don't have to go through the ebook to search for that text. So that was another really interesting part of what we did. And that was also just creating that profile and thinking about how end users would be using this book, thinking about all of the different use cases, not just the ones we had in our head, but everything that we could think of this book being used for, trying to account for all of those nuances. And I come personally, my company works in a very design thinking fashion, and this was a really good human-centered design experiment to say, I know how I might use the book, but how might the Marines or any other end user be using this book? What would they need to report on? What kind of information might they want? And it was also nice to have Judy as an intermediary. So we could tell Judy, this makes no sense. And Judy knows why it's like that. Judy was part of the trial where they had to set it up really quickly and they had to make these decisions. But we could say, this makes no sense from a total outsider's perspective. And then kind of marry that it's like this for a reason, but also it makes no sense and it could be better. And Judy was a really good intermediary for that. And I was glad that we had that dynamic on the team where we had like a SME, but we could also be very direct with the SME. What was that like for you, Judy?
It was fantastic for me to be able to do this revision of the xAPI with input from other industries, other organizations. We have some freelancers on the team. Kristen is an agency instructional designer. We have somebody, we actually had one of our team members was from an organization that EduWorks is building some Pebble stuff for the Georgia Department of Education. So we were able to get her input, and just like input from all over. So it wasn't like we were just designing the xAPI statements in a vacuum. So that was fantastic.
We had, and I think I scheduled a tweet in case I forgot to mention this. Helena Smith and Cassandra Gall were also on our team. And Cassandra especially was like our master coder. So she did a really good job with the backend coding portion. I could just copy all of her code and make that work. So that was the objects thing. I want to talk a couple minutes about what we're planning for maybe the spring cohort to extend this. But first, Judy, do you want to talk while you have the power of the screen a little bit about next steps from your end?
Sure. So like I mentioned, the next step for PeBL is to actually create the authoring tool. And that was one of the things that I'm hoping that people would get interested in, or at least I would be able to get the word out about a little bit through the xAPI cohort. Because again, we don't want to do this in a vacuum. PeBL was created to be a community project. I always know, through my history as an instructional designer, if somebody gave me the chance to beta test or influence the creation of an authoring tool, I was all over it because especially if I was really excited about the kinds of things that the tool would be capable of. And so that is a moment now that I get to extend this to everybody else. So if you're interested in becoming and joining our advisor team, then you can email me or you can go to pebblesolutions.com and just sign up for the mailing list there, and I kind of keep everybody informed through that mailing list. We have some onboarding sessions. You get access to a forum with cool PeBL resources. So you can actually get your hands on the code base and start building things like we did in the xAPI cohort. But like I said, the next step is to actually influence the authoring experience, which I'm very committed to it being a very simple authoring experience on the front end, even though you can create some very complex and dynamic and adaptive things and produce great xAPI on the back end. So please feel free to get in touch with me if you're interested in that. And I definitely plan to continue running or participating in a cohort team. Kristen actually ran the team, which is fantastic, but was our team leader. But we definitely plan to continue participating in the cohort and getting people involved in the creation of the authoring tool and the improvement of what PeBL does.
Yes, and so if I can have screen sharing power back, I can show a little bit of the stuff that we didn't get to in the course of this cohort. I got a bunch of extra work, which is great, but also didn't leave a ton of time. Helena got a full-time contract, so she was working unexpectedly a lot. So we ended up being a little less helpful. But if you can see this storyboard here, this is kind of the full outline of the book. This is an app called Mural that I use constantly. It's an online whiteboard. But this is the full outline of stuff we wanted to get to. The really interesting piece to me is we were chunking the different extensions. So these are all the different extensions. Content morphing is the one that changes the content based on a selection that someone makes or a series of selections. That's a really, really powerful one. Show hide, figure, glossary hot word, pop out, a low stakes multiple choice question, which means you wouldn't use this for a full assessment. You wouldn't be able to, correct me if I'm wrong, Judy, track results from question to question without adding a whole series of reporting?
No, so the reason, actually that's a really great question, and the reason that it's called a low-stakes multiple choice question is honestly purely because one of the organizations that we were working with in the development of this didn't really believe in assessment, and they will remain unnamed. But we wanted we were building out the functionality, and they were making some changes, or they were really influencing the functionality of how we thought about multiple choice questions. And so we called it low-stakes multiple choice questions so that it wouldn't be confused as like an assessment thing. But it is still tracked. It absolutely could still have content changes attached to it based on what you answer. It has all of the functionality of an assessment question. That's really just kind of a branding thing, because we wanted to put it in there for its functionality for retrieval practice, because multiple choice questions obviously have a huge amount of utility outside of just assessment and like accreditation types of things. So that's really why it's called that.
Is it true that you wouldn't be able to connect like the results of 10 multiple choice questions and get like your result is 90% because you got 9 out of 10, or am I wrong on that?
No, you can. Most of the things that we've done with PeBL have been very independent, scattered multiple choice questions. And a lot of that, again, is because a lot of how the concept and design work has happened is that the multiple choice questions are often used for retrieval practice, but each one of those multiple choice questions that you see in a PeBL book is actually part of a quiz. So potentially it's just a one question quiz. So you could connect, like you were saying, 5 or 10 questions within a quiz. We just don't have any examples that do it, but it is
Well,
for it.
thank you. I'm very excited about that actually. So I'm glad I was wrong. See, we're all still learning about this. So with 1 minute left, the quick thing is we were tracking how an instructional designer might use these. So what instructional design terms, if you said, I want user interaction, great. You could use data entry. You could use the different types of data entry. You could use a multiple choice question. You could even put that together into a larger quiz and get the reporting from that. And then if you wanted adaptive learning, here are the ones that would work for that. So that's what we want to be building out in the spring. So please contact any of us. Just yell at us on Slack if you want to be part of that, because this is going to be a really interesting part of it, I think.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thanks, Kristen and Judy, and thank you everyone online for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. But this is a super interesting and fun project, and it's exciting to hear that you're planning to carry it forward into the spring cohort. So with that, it doesn't seem like there's any other questions. So I am going to, or we are going to go on mute here in Chelsea while everyone kind of breaks for lunch. Hopefully you guys can all go grab some lunch too, and we will see everyone back at 12:45 for the demos from Team Unity 3D and
Awesome.
Team Alexa.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for porting me in from rainy Washington, D.C.
Excellent. Thank you, Kristen.